Hi and welcome back. In this lecture we can talk about key insight 3, the rise of alternatives, functional food and sustainability. Well, first let's look at some graphs and charts to gain a much more better understanding about the impact of the food and beverage industry on the environment. So if you look at this chart, 29% of the Earth's surface is land and 71% is ocean. So out of that 29% of land, only 71% is habitable land. The remaining 10% is glaciers and then 19% barren land. So out of that 71% of the habitable land, 50% is utilized for agriculture, 37% is utilized for forest, 11% for shrubs and 1% for urban and build-up land and 1% for freshwater. Then out of the 50% which is used for agriculture, 77% is used for livestock, which is basically meat and dairy, and 23% is used for crops. So that 23% of land which is used for crops provide 83% of the global calorie supply from plant-based food, and that 77% of the livestock which is meat and dairy only provides up to 18% of the global calorie supply. And if you look at the global protein supply, 77% of the land which is utilized for livestock, which is meat and dairy, only provides 37%, while the 23% of the agricultural land which is used for crops provide up to 63% from plant-based food for the global protein supply. So we can clearly see that the livestock and the meat industry efficiency and the productivity is very low when compared to their plant-based counterpart. Moving on, if you look at the land use per kilogram of food product, lamb and mutton take around 369.81 square meters per kilogram of food product, while beef, which is herd beef, take up to 326.21 square meters. And if you look at their plant-based counterpart, the land use per kilogram of food product of plant-based proteins is less than 10 square meters. Moving forward, if you look at the land use per 100 grams of protein, lamb uses 184.8 square meters, beef or herd beef uses 163.6 square meters. So livestock and the poultry requires a significant amount of land when compared to their plant-based counterpart to provide 100 grams of protein. So moving forward, if you look at the land use of foods per 1000 kilocalories, which is basically calculating the amount of energy that you get from food, lamb and mutton and also poultry and dairy products seems to top the list. So beef or herd beef stands at around 119.49 square meters, while lamb and mutton stands around 116.66 square meters. Then let's look at the environmental impacts of the food and the agriculture industry. So the food and the agriculture industry is responsible for 26% of the annual global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's around 13.7 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. And agriculture and the food industry uses 50% of the global habitable land. And also 70% of the global freshwater is withdrawn for the agriculture industry. And if you look at eutrophication, where the entire body of water becomes enriched too much with minerals and nutrients, becomes polluted, 74% of global eutrophication is because of agriculture. And if you look at biodiversity, 94% of the mammal biomass are livestock. So if you look at this, there's a significant imbalance of the livestock and the agriculture and the food supply chain networks. And we need to start rethinking them to support a growing population. Then if you look at the global greenhouse gas emissions from food production, 18% is because of supply chains, so things like retail, packaging, transport and food processing. Then 31% is from livestock and fish farms. Crop production is 27%, so crops for animal feed and crops for human food. Then 24% is from land use, so land use for human food and also land use for livestock. Then if you look at the greenhouse gas emissions across the supply chain, meat and livestock is significantly higher when compared to their plant-based counterparts. So herd beef, lamb and mutton and cheese tops the first 3 places in this chart. Then if you look at the greenhouse gas emissions per 100 grams of protein, herd beef tops the list with 49.89 kilograms. Then there's lamb and mutton with 19.85, prawns, which is farmed prawns, 18.19, and beef dairy herd it's around 16.87 kilograms. So this too is significantly higher than their plant-based counterparts. Then if you look at this chart, 6% of the global greenhouse gas emissions come from food losses and food waste. So in this lecture, we can talk about the rise of alternatives, plant-based foods and functional foods along with sustainability. So now you saw the environmental impact that the livestock and the poultry industry is having. So now let's switch to the alternative or the solution of that problem, plant-based foods. So it's expected that the global retail sales of the plant-based food alternatives are expected to reach $162 billion by the year 2030. And also, of the consumers who have tried the plant-based meats, around 80% are planning to replace all or some of the animal-based meats with plant-based meat in the next year. And most consumers, according to statistics, around 73%, agree that the plant-based meats should mimic the real red meat, and also factors like taste, price, level of processing, variety, freshness, and the texture play a major role in the consumer adoption of plant-based meats. Next, let's look at plant-based and cultivated seafood. So the world population would require 232 million metric tons of seafood, around 62 million metric tons more than the planet is expected to produce annually. So if you look at the alternatives, there's two. The first is plant-based seafood. So this is created with plant and algae-derived ingredients to replicate the flavor and the texture of seafood. Then there's a significantly advanced part which uses a lot of biotechnology and other advanced technologies and tools, which is cultivated seafood. So cultivated seafood is created by cultivating the cells of fish and shellfish to replicate the flavor and texture of seafood. So it's basically taking cells from fish and shellfish and getting those cells to multiply very quickly to create the seafood. So factors such as seafood is widely perceived as more healthy, and also there are concerns about sustainability, things like overfishing, food safety, and also seafood is often perceived as difficult to prepare and are impacting the choices and decision of customers. So this is a very good opportunity for plant-based seafood and cultivated seafood. So there are lots of underlying factors which needs to be addressed in order to bring this to global consumer adoption. So the first is the behavior and mindset issues like dependency on meat and rationalization. For example, red meat is considered more masculine and perceptions like that. Then there's things like the feelings of sadness and deprivation. So you feel that you're not getting real meat. Then things like the unawareness of the environmental impact. Then there's things like the avoidance of novel food. So people want to try what's familiar and not what's new. Then the lack of plant-based options at restaurants and also challenges in fitting in with the meat eaters. So you might be considered like a social outcast if you go for plant-based meat. Then there's things like the lack of knowledge regarding consumption and the environmental impact, and also the perceived difficulty in preparation. So all these things must be addressed to accelerate the adoption of plant-based meats. So what are strategies that we can use to overcome this? So one such strategy is developing products which mimic the sensory properties of meat, reducing the price to reach a larger customer base, and also develop easy to prepare products which fit in with the busy lifestyle of the consumers nowadays, and also promoting the health benefits to be followed to accelerate the adoption of plant-based meats. Then we come to functional food. So functional food is basically any type of food which is considered to have additional health benefits beyond their nutritional value. So functional foods are also known to promote optimal health and help to reduce the risk of disease. For example, oatmeal. So oatmeal is known to contain soluble fiber which can lower cholesterol, apart from the other health benefits that oatmeal offers. So it can also include things like vitamin D fortified orange juice and yogurts containing probiotics. So because of this whole COVID-19 pandemic, people started to listen more to their health. So they started looking for solutions not just to satisfy their taste buds and tantalize their taste buds, but also that offer real nutritional and functional value. So if you look at the global functional ingredient market, it's expected to reach $100 billion by the year 2025, and it's expected to grow continuously. And then if you look at the sustainability factor, we are seeing strong action being taken by businesses such as reducing the single-use plastics within the supply chain, going carbon negative, So also growing commitments from businesses to make their business process net zero or carbon negative. So we're seeing public commitments from companies and also publicly disclosing their sustainability goals and what we call ESG goals, which is environmental, social and governance frameworks, goals and targets. So we're seeing a lot of business ethics coming up because companies know that consumers demand much more than just giving them good products and services and a good after sales. Well, those are a few factors as far as key insight 3 is concerned: the rise of alternatives, plant-based foods, functional food, and sustainability. I'll see you on another lecture.